Those damn gypsies are a menace to our community. I won't feel safe till they're gone.
While anti-Semitism has been glaringly obvious in America for a long time, Antiziganism is not often, if at all, given much thought, in spite of the fact that the Romani people were also targeted by Hitler and the Nazis during the Holocaust. But we don't need to go as far as Nazi Germany to find Antiziganism. There's plenty of that in America, Europe, and other parts of the world, even to this day. Anti-Semitism has been the subject of many American movies and other pop culture too, unlike Antiziganism. The last place you'd expect to find a plot involving anti-Romani hatred is in the American horror film. That's exactly the subject of 1983's The Prey, a slasher flick whose villain's backstory hinges on an especially egregious act of hatred committed against a camp full of Romani people in the late 1940s. While The Prey isn't a prestige drama or an Oscar-bait thriller, it still manages to vividly capture the ugly anti-Ziganism that has been part of America since decades prior to the emergence of the Nazis and their eventual persecution of the Roma people. The fact the flashbacks in The Prey take place in 1948, only 3 years after the liberation of the Nazis' Auschwitz concentration camp, brings Nazi Germany and America's dual histories closer together, illustrating how the fires of anti-Ziganism continued in the United States in spite of the atrocities already visited upon the Romani people.
We're gonna barbecue us a whole bunch of gypsies.
The Prey is, for the most part, a typical slasher film, in that it depicts a group of young people going into a remote place where a villain tries to murder every last one of them. Its version of the plot involves a bunch of young folks heading to the Rocky Mountains in Colorado in search of fun, only for the sole survivor of a 1948 massacre to take out his revenge on them. It's the fact The Prey uses anti-Ziganism as a starting point for all its horror, which makes this early 80s slasher different from so many of the other slashers that were released at the time. In the plot, one of the Roma men in 1948 has an affair with a white woman who, later when confronted by her husband, lies and accuses her Roma lover of rape, leading to the vicious murder and burning of the Roma's camp. This horrifying act of white lies and white violence is what frames everything in the film, from slasher kills to folk songs to cucumber and cream cheese sandwiches. The previously mentioned flashbacks in The Prey take place in 1948, barely removed from the Holocaust and the hatred of the Nazis. Historians estimate that between 250,000 to 500,000 Romani and Sinti people were murdered during the Holocaust at the hands of Nazis and their collaborators. Anti-Romani hatred goes further back than the Holocaust when it comes to America. In 1911, a 4-year-old Czech-American girl from Chicago named Elsie Parubek went missing, and all but immediately the Roma community were accused of having taken her. Cops claimed that Elsie's disappearance was due to the supposed natural love of the wandering people for blue-eyed, yellow-haired children. And just like in The Prey, when a racist white man calls the Roma, to whom he derogatorily refers to as gypsies, thieves and rapists, so did the white communities of Chicago in 1911 call the Roma child snatchers, which itself is a long-standing racist trope lobbed at Romani people. Sadly, much hasn't changed for the Roma since the early 20th century. They're still a constantly persecuted people. The Roma in places like Italy and Ukraine especially are still experiencing anti-Ziganist violence and, like the Roma in The Prey, continue to have their camps burned to the ground. In an article titled American Roma, The Hidden Gypsy World, Ian Hancock and Christina Salvador wrote, "The first Roma to come to America accompanied Columbus on his second voyage in 1498, and during the 17th century, small numbers arrived from different parts of Western Europe. The first major wave in the US, however, came from Britain in the mid-1800s, followed by a second influx towards the end of the century when slavery was finally abolished in Eastern Europe. The collapse of communism in 1989 led to a third big migration, spurred on by the re-emergence of ethnic tensions in the Eastern European states. Landless and constantly on the move, the Roma lack any kind of political or military defense, making them an easy target for nationalist extremists. It's kind of funny that white Americans, descended from European settlers who colonized America, look down upon the Roma since, in a way, Europeans are just as much a so-called traveling people as the Roma. We even see the colonial influence on America subtly in The Prey. First, the tranquility of nature is shattered early in the film when the group of young people come driving down a road in their van, and they're singing a version of a folk song known most of the time as Roll Your Leg Over.
With a cast iron.
This folk song dates back to 17th century England. Second, during a later scene we see one of the men in the film eating a cucumber and cream cheese sandwich. The origin of the cucumber and cream cheese sandwich is a bourgeois tradition from Victorian England. It was and still is a part of tea time for many. So even if unintentionally, The Prey portrays white Americans as still, even in the 1980s, deeply influenced by their settler colonialist roots and their own people's penchant for travel, not to mention stealing. White Americans in The Prey, and many white Americans back in Chicago during 1911, as well as many still today, refer to the Roma as gypsies, which comes along with connotations of stealing. Meanwhile, white America has stolen indigenous land and it's stolen all the parts of British culture it didn't reject. The Prey actually criticizes the settler colonial project of America, even if the ending is a bit nasty.
Too long Roma have been invisible. They've been the forgotten Holocaust. Maybe not even the known Holocaust. 500,000 Roma were killed. They're still on the run around the world. Today you see anti-Semitism, racism, ethnic purity manifested in America. Well, it's America, Europe, it has no place in a civilized world. You must reject it.
The ending of The Prey kind of falls into the "this is exactly what the racists were saying about the Roma and the film is playing into it." Another interpretation is of the ending as the remaining Roma victim of the 1948 fire purposefully becoming a scourge to white America by visiting upon them, and unfortunately the final girl, the same evil for which the Roma camp in the film was originally almost entirely eradicated. Yes, it's horrific to think that the burned-up slasher villain is taking a woman, who has no ties to the 1948 massacre, back to his cave where he impregnates her. It's very yuck. However, it's equally horrific that a woman in 1948 willingly played into Antiziganism to excuse herself from an affair, an excuse that violently cost dozens of Roma their lives. And after all, this is the horror genre, and The Prey is already dealing with further violent American persecution of an ethnic group who, only a few years prior, were in danger of being wiped off the face of the earth by white nationalism. The Prey is ultimately about a violent American tradition upheld by not just white male hatred, but also white women's lies. The inciting incident of The Prey occurs in 1948, and in real life, 7 years later in 1955, a 14-year-old black boy named Emmett Till was abducted, tortured, then lynched in Mississippi because a white woman, Carolyn Bryant, claimed he touched her hand and flirted with her. The film brutally reflects on a white male legacy of violence and a white female legacy of permission for white male violence. For so long in America, men of color's sexualities have been portrayed as dangerous to the fabric of the country itself due to their perceived threat to white women. Similar to The Prey's murderous fire and Emmett Till's real-life lynching, the Duluth lynchings were another American moment of white violence perpetrated against black men who were wrongfully accused of raping a young white woman. Even long before the Jim Crow South, white America portrayed the indigenous peoples, whose land they stole, as similar threats to the supposed purity of white women. The history of a colonized America rests on all sorts of violence, but it's been indelibly marked by white lies, based in the glorification of white women, followed by white violence that has not yet disappeared. Today, the same kinds of nasty things that the Roma, African Americans, indigenous peoples, among others, have been accused of are the things that many white folks accuse Arab men of. Not that the sexualized prejudice against any of those groups have ceased entirely. The prey touches so deeply on this ugly American tradition that it's hard to pass it off as just another slasher, or to criticize it too deeply for its many flaws. It's a grueling piece of slasher cinema because it's a gothic look back through America's entire history since European settlers first came to colonize indigenous land. A bloody epitome of the terror that is America. A terror that continues to lie and steal and do violence to the vulnerable.